So Malawi, a country with which we share profound and historical ties, is going for their repeat election on the 23rd of June 2020. And I want to extend a hearty congratulations to the people of Malawi. The fact that they have come this far is really testament to the strength of their democracy. I think most people recall that in 2017, Kenya had a repeat election. Raila Odinga had to withdraw in 2008. Zimbabwe had a repeat election, and the late Morgan Tsvangirai also had to pull out. But the same fate has not visited Malawi. It looks like they're reaching for the finishing line, and it looks like they will pull through. And I think that is really remarkable and is a good thing for the sub-region. These events are really subsequent to the decision that was reached by the Constitutional Court of Malawi. They ruled against the first election, and that was confirmed by the Supreme Court of Malawi. In spite of the fact that the judgment from the courts, it lists a lot of reasons why that particular election was overturned. It's particularly scathing of the Malawi Electoral Commission. It actually finds evidence and makes findings of rigging, and the fact that the commission was complicit in the rigging, the TPEX of results, and all those reasons are listed as being the basis upon which the election was overturned. But after listing all those reasons, the court then says, well, even if none of these violations had been committed, we're still going to overturn this election. And the reason for that is the court finds the fact that in order to win a presidential election in Malawi, you need to have won at least 50% plus one. That became their interpretation to the constitutional provision for the president winning a majority. So the Constitution of Malawi does not itself require 50% plus one. It requires the president to win a majority, and the court then interpreted majority to mean 50% plus one. It had previously ruled otherwise, but they changed their minds, and this was their ruling in this particular case. So in the previous election, the incumbent president, Peter Mutharika, had 38, I think, 0.57% of the vote. It was declared the winner, so the court found that didn't meet that quantitative requirement. So even if there'd been no TPEX, even if there'd been no evidence of rigging, any of that, this election would have still been overturned just on that one basis. And that is more or less the same basis upon which Zimbabwe had its repeat election in 2008. That was not ordered by a court, but it was simply a failure to meet that quantitative requirement of 50% plus one. The Zimbabwean requirement is in the electoral law. It's not in the constitution. That's just parliament, which literally means parliament can change that requirement anytime based on whichever party is the parliamentary majority. But in Malawi, that is not in the Presidential and Parliamentary Elections Act. This had to be read in from the constitution. So the court then ordered parliament to enact the law, which requires 50% plus one of the votes for the presidential result. And in Zimbabwe, we've been having a lot of battles about the extent to which a court can order parliament to pass a law, particularly in reference to the first amendment to the constitution. And in Malawi, they've done so, and they've done so in the context of interpreting and enforcing the constitution, that if the court actually finds that this is what the constitution requires, then it can require parliament to enact that particular law. And then the mechanics of parliament then kick in, and that is an entire different story, which I want to talk to towards the end. Right now, I want to talk briefly about the candidates for the election tomorrow. So the incumbent president, Peter Mutharika, he leads the Democratic Progressive Party. He's seeking a second and final term. And that particular party, the DPP, Democratic Progressive Party, is the same party from which Joyce Banda broke away from when she was dismissed and then formed her own People's Party. But that same party, the DPP, was formed by the incumbent president's late brother Bingu Mutharika when he himself also split away from the United Democratic Front, the UDF, a party which was formed by Bakili Muluzi. So there's quite a history there. Peter Mutharika has formed a coalition, more or less, and picked his running mate is, please forgive me if I do not pronounce these names correctly, but Atupele Muluzi, who is the son of Bakili Muluzi, who is now leading the UDF, is the running mate of Peter Mutharika. As we said previously, Peter Mutharika had 38.57% of the vote in the first vote, and Tupele Muluzi had about 4 to 5% of the vote, and they formed a coalition. On the other side, you have Mr. Lazarus Chakwera, who leads the Malawi Congress Party. And for anybody for whom that sounds familiar, that is indeed the party that was led by Hastings Kamuzu Banda, which led Malawi for a long time after independence, until it was defeated in 1994 by Bakili Muluzi's UDF. So that is the party which he leads, and he has formed a coalition with, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing this right, but Solos Chilima, who is a former vice president to Peter Mutharika, and Solos Chilima himself actually polled about 20.24% of the vote the previous election. Lazarus Chakwera had about 35% of the vote, 35.41% it should be. And so a lot of people are excited by the fact that if you look at the combined totals from the first election of Solos Chilima and Lazarus Chakwera, it comes up to about 56% of the vote, which would be well over the 50% plus one required. And so people are massively confident that that can tilt the result. Whether in fact the result will be reflective of the first election, that's another question for which I cannot answer. I try to stick to analysis and no predictions. But I think most of us can tell that Malawi is different from a lot of countries in the region, right? Malawi has had a history of changes of presidents and changes of political parties of the president. Malawi has that history, so does Zambia, but Zimbabwe doesn't have that history. Well, certainly if you look in the sub-region, if you look at Angola with MPLA, Botswana with the BDP, Namibia with SWAPO, Mozambique with Frelimo, Tanzania with Chama Pinduzi, and South Africa with ANC, Zimbabwe with ZANU-PF, we don't have that history. It's mostly the independence parties that are still in control. So Malawi and Zambia are really kind of like different from a lot of countries in the sub-region. So it's even more interesting for us to observe what happens over there. So this election that is being held is actually by resolution. Like I said before, so the court ordered Parliament to enact laws for the requirement of 50% plus one. Parliament actually passed some bills, but the president just chose not to sign them. Just say, comrades, I'm not going to sign this. And that is part of the problem with constitutional checks and balances. The executive arm does have a latitude within which it can refuse assent to bills. And so members of the Malawian parliament say, your comrades, if we're not creative, there's not going to be an election here. We have to think outside the box. So what they did was to pass a parliamentary resolution, something that does not require the president's assent. And in terms of that resolution, then the Malawi Electoral Commission acceded and said, yes, we'll hold an election on that particular date. But there's still that gap because that law requiring 50% plus one is still not there. So presumably this may be an election in terms of which the president is declared in terms of a constitutional court and Supreme Court decision rather than electoral law. So, and it would look like it is in fact the court's judgment which is being treated as legislature. This of course will not be a problem if one of the candidates then garners 50% plus one of the vote. Then the question won't arise as to what happens because it's clear that that winner would have been in line with the findings of the court. The problems would emerge if nobody gets 50% plus one of the vote, and then you're asking questions of what happens now, what happens next, how do you proceed without a law from parliament. Those questions become that much more difficult to answer, but hopefully we won't have to get that far. From the reports I've seen, it is only up to 3 people who are competing in the race, and it is really the 2 candidates who are the most viable. One other thing to look out for now will be the observer reports, because for Malawi, just as Kenya, there was a lot of outrage regarding observer reports which had endorsed an election which is later then overturned by a court. So it will be interesting to see how observers then couch this election with an eye on the findings that the court made, in another eye that if there's another court case they are not found wanting. But other than that, we wish our brothers and sisters in Malawi the very best. We hope it's peaceful, it's free, it's fair, and the entire sub-region hopes to learn a lot from that experience so that we can grow our own democracies.